The order came through the wall speaker in Vaethi, which I don't speak, but I didn't need to. I could read it in the way Senior Advisor Orith's voice dropped at the end of the sentence, that particular flat cadence that means a decision has already been made and recorded and filed. The blast door at the end of the corridor had been seen cycling open for the past 40 seconds. It had 12 seconds left before it sealed. Queen Erin Voss was on the floor 6 meters behind me, her back against the inner wall, one hand pressed to the crack in her shoulder, pauldron where the first collapse had driven a ceiling support into her. She was conscious. Dark eyes were open and tracking. That was what mattered. I did the math on the blast door. I looked at her. I stepped back from the door. The Vaethi guard captain. Saren, a professional, someone I'd run morning perimeter checks with for 4 months. He looked at me through the narrowing gap with an expression I can only describe as genuine sorrow. Not for leaving her. For me. He thought I didn't understand what I was choosing. He raised one hand, palm out, in what I'd learned was a Vaethi gesture that means roughly, I acknowledge you. I cannot help you. The door sealed. The second tremor came 11 minutes later. That one brought down the skylight in the antechamber. Pale afternoon light suddenly flooding in through a ragged hole, blast dust catching it, and turning the air white. I had already dragged a collapsed roof strut across the main corridor junction to brace the arch. Above Erin's position, it held, barely. She said something in Vaethi when the shaking stopped. Her voice was steady, cost her something. I could see it in the line of her jaw. I don't have the language, I told her. If you're asking whether the arch is going to hold, I think so. For a while. I was telling you, she said, in the careful, precise standard she used in diplomatic sessions, that there is an emergency maintenance crawlway. 17 meters north, behind the munitions panel. It exits outside the collapse zone. She paused. It is large enough for one person of your dimensions. Good to know. She looked at me the way people look at someone who has misunderstood something important. Sergeant Morrow, I am giving you an egress point. Yes, that was an order. I understood it as information, I said, about the crawlway. The silence after that had a particular quality. Fortress groaned somewhere above us. Something shifting, resettling. The afternoon light, through the broken skylight, moved slowly across the floor as the hours went by, and I worked. The shoulder pauldron I could not remove without proper tools, but I could stabilize it. I used a section of my own chest webbing, cut free with my boot knife, to strap the cracked plate against the underlying seal. It wasn't medical work. It was the kind of work you do when medical work isn't available. She sat still for it, watching my hands, not making a sound. When I pulled the last strap tight, she let out one slow breath through her nose. That was all. I found water in a cracked equipment locker near the east wall. 3 sealed ration canisters, the kind Vaethi ground crews carry. I brought her one. She took it without comment, drank half, handed the rest back. I drank the other half. That was the whole conversation. The third tremor was the worst. It came in 2 waves. The first a deep groaning roll. The second, a sharp lateral crack that brought down a section of the north wall and filled the corridor with choking plaster and old wire. I felt the arch above us shift before it went, and I moved without thinking. Got my shoulders up under the main strut and held it while the section, above her position, redistributed. 15 seconds, maybe 20. Long enough that my vision went gray at the edges. When it settled, I lowered my arms and sat down against the wall next to her. My hands were shaking, put them flat on my knees and waited for them to stop. She was looking at me. Not with the diplomatic composure she'd worn since the door sealed. Something else. Something that hadn't decided yet what it was. You are injured, she said. Strain something. It'll hold. You could have reached the crawlway in the interval between the first and second tremor. Could have, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about that for a moment. Not because I didn't know. Because I wanted to give her an honest answer, and not a performed one. Because you were still in the building, I said. She was quiet for a long time after that. The light through the skylight had gone amber by then. Late afternoon shading toward evening. Somewhere outside the compound I could hear the distant sound of cutting equipment, the rescue team. 4 hours. Maybe 5 since the seal. The Vaethi Protectorate ran efficient recovery operations when they decided recovery was worth attempting. I'd always respected that about them. I wondered what had changed the calculus. Whether Orath had reversed the call on his own, or whether someone above him had overruled it. I wondered what it had cost her to be declared unrecoverable and then recovered, and whether the Vaethi court had a word for the thing they would feel when the door opened and she was alive. She spoke while we waited. Not about the collapse, not about the evacuation order. She told me about the diplomatic agreement she'd come to this world to sign, a border rights compact with the Neth Confederacy, 3 years of negotiation, 6 separate failed drafts. She explained the specific clause that had finally broken the deadlock and why it mattered, and what the next 20 years of the frontier might look like if it held. She spoke the way she probably spoke in sessions, precise, structured, unhurried. Like the information mattered and she intended to make sure I understood it correctly. I listened. I asked 2 questions. She answered them fully. I don't know exactly why she told me all of that. I've thought about it since. Maybe it was simply that we had hours to fill, and she preferred to fill them with something real. Maybe she was keeping herself anchored. Talking, to stay conscious, to stay present, to push back against the pain she wasn't acknowledging. Maybe she just decided in that particular moment that I was worth talking to. The cutting equipment reached our corridor at the 3rd hour after the last tremor. I heard the team before I saw the light. Vaethi voices, efficient, professional, the sound of plasma cutters, working through the sealed blast door section by section. The door came down in 4 pieces. Orath was first through the gap. Behind him, 6 guards, 2 medics, and 2 advisors whose names I hadn't learned. They swept the corridor with lights, and those lights landed on the Queen. Alive, upright, her cracked pauldron strapped tight, posture the same composed certainty it always had. The silence lasted only a moment. Aaron Voss spoke before Orath could. She didn't speak to him. She looked at me. At the shaking hands I'd put flat on my knees again, at the dust on my fatigues, at whatever she could read in my face. And she said my name, not my rank, not the human, not Smalshant, Kale. And then she said something in Vaethi that I didn't have the language for. But Orath translated it. Later, when he filed the incident report, he included the translation in the official record. Perhaps because he was a thorough man, perhaps because he understood that some things needed to be documented. The line she spoke, he wrote, was a formal Vaethi construction used in very specific contexts, something close to. This one did not leave. It is, he noted, phrase the Vaethi used to mark a debt of the kind that has no adequate repayment. I still have my copy of that report. I've read it a few times. Not often, just enough. She was correct about the compact, by the way. The border rights agreement held, still holding, as far as I know, 7 years on. I think about that sometimes. About the fact that she told me all of it while we sat in the dark waiting for the cutters. Like she'd already decided I was someone worth telling. That, more than the report, is the thing I keep.